quiet morning, an empty bar. But everything can change in a heartbeat when danger walks through that door. What happens next will test courage, strength, and the will to stand up for what's right. Watch until the end to see how it all unfolds. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this. The city was still asleep when John Cena's black pickup truck rolled slowly down the quiet street, the sky above painted in the soft, deep blue of early morning. The occasional flicker of a street lamp and the distant sound of a stray cat darting into an alley were the only signs of life. John drove with the ease of a man who had done this countless times before, his large hands steady on the wheel, his eyes calm as they scanned the familiar surroundings. This was his ritual, his time, when the world hadn't yet caught up with him and the city felt like it belonged to no one. He pulled up in front of the small bar tucked between two taller buildings, its darkened neon sign barely visible in the dim light. The place had seen better days, with its worn wooden doors and faded awning, but that was part of its charm. More importantly, it was one of the few places where John could find a moment of peace, where he wasn't a celebrity, just a man who enjoyed his morning drink. Killing the engine, John leaned back against the seat and sat there for a moment, listening to the quiet. This bar wasn't fancy. It didn't serve overpriced cocktails or attract large crowds. It was simple, real, and that was exactly why he came here every morning before the city woke. He could sit, have a drink, read the paper, and enjoy the kind of silence that felt almost sacred. There were no cameras here, no fans demanding selfies or autographs, just him, the bar, and the slow-rising sun. After a few minutes, the wooden door creaked open, and a young woman stepped out onto the threshold. She was in her mid-20s, her warm brown skin glowing faintly in the soft light. Her eyes were dark and expressive, filled with both kindness and resilience. Her name was Kira, and she had taken over the bar after her father passed, determined to keep his dream alive. She spotted John's truck immediately and smiled knowingly as she approached the door. "Morning, John," she called softly as she unlocked the door and pushed it open. John nodded from inside the truck, his lips curving into a slight smile. "Morning, Kira." "Sorry to keep you waiting," she added as she moved inside, already pulling her apron around her waist. "No problem," John replied, finally stepping out of the truck and making his way toward the bar's entrance. The air was crisp, cool against his skin, but familiar. He took his usual seat at the bar, the one that had practically molded itself to his frame over time. Kira was already behind the counter, moving with practiced ease as she began pulling out glasses and checking her supplies. "The usual?" she asked, glancing up at him. John gave a slight nod. "Yeah." Kira worked quickly, her hands steady as she mixed his drink. Despite the early hour, she was already fully awake, her movements smooth and precise. She placed the glass in front of him and leaned slightly against the counter, her eyes studying him with mild curiosity. "You always get here before me," she remarked, even earlier than usual today. "What's the deal?" John took a slow sip of his drink before answering. "I like the quiet. If I come later, I draw too much attention. Mornings are peaceful, no cameras, no noise, just me and my drink." Kira chuckled softly, shaking her head. "I guess that makes sense. Never thought of it that way." John simply nodded, taking another sip. The quiet between them was comfortable, a shared understanding that didn't require words. Kira moved away to begin prepping for the day, setting out clean glasses, wiping down the counter, and checking the inventory. The bar was small, intimate. It wasn't much, but it had heart. Slowly, the city outside began to stir. A few pedestrians shuffled past the front windows, and in the distance the hum of traffic started to grow. The first regular customers trickled in. Blue-collar workers grabbing a quick coffee before heading to their shifts. The atmosphere remained relaxed, the morning lull holding strong. John finished his drink and folded his newspaper, glancing at the clock. He had gotten what he came for, his moment of peace before the day truly began. He pulled out a few bills and set them on the counter, stretching his arms in preparation to leave. But then the sound of roaring engines shattered the calm. John's eyes flicked toward the entrance just as the rumble of motorcycles grew louder, a deep, guttural growl that signaled trouble long before trouble even showed itself. The sound of the engines cut abruptly, replaced by a heavy silence that settled over the bar like a thick blanket. Then, with a loud crash, the door burst open, slamming against the wall with enough force to make everyone jump. 4 men stood in the doorway, rough-looking, their leather jackets worn and covered in patches, their boots scuffed and dusty. They carried themselves with the kind of swagger that only came from years of getting away with whatever they wanted. The leader, taller than the others, had a square jaw and a thick beard. He stepped inside first, his eyes scanning the room before landing on Kira. A slow grin spread across his face. "Well, well, boys. Would you look at this?" he drawled. "They'll let just anyone run a place these days, huh?" His companions snickered, stepping in behind him, their presence immediately darkening the atmosphere. The friendly chatter of the regulars died off, replaced by an uneasy silence. "If this place had any real standards," another biker sneered, "they wouldn't let the likes of you run it." Kira didn't flinch. She stood tall behind the bar, her expression calm, but her shoulders tense. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice steady. The leader leaned on the bar, the leather of his jacket creaking as he rested his elbows on the counter. "Oh, I don't know," he said, pretending to think. "Maybe I just want to see how you work. Never seen someone like you run a bar before." His friends laughed, their amusement laced with malice. Kira remained unfazed. "If you're here to drink, I'll serve you. Otherwise, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The leader raised an eyebrow, his smirk widening. "Oh, and what if I don't feel like leaving?" A tense silence stretched between them, the air growing heavier by the second. The regulars stayed rooted in their seats, watching but not daring to move. At his usual table, John Cena folded his newspaper slowly. He had been silent until now, merely observing. He set the paper aside, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. The bikers hadn't noticed him yet, but they would, and when they did, the morning would take a very different turn. The leader's gaze never left Kira as he continued. "Thing is, sweetheart, we're not here for drinks. We're here for business. Protection." He grinned wider. $2,000 a week, and we make sure nothing happens to this place. You pay, everything stays nice and quiet. You don't, well, accidents happen." He shrugged as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Kira's jaw clenched, but her voice didn't waver. "I'm not paying you, now get out." The leader laughed. Wrong answer. He lunged forward so fast Kira barely had time to react. He grabbed a fistful of her shirt and yanked her forward. With a vicious jerk, he tore the fabric open, exposing her bra to the entire bar. Gasps echoed through the room. One of the bikers laughed and pulled out his phone, starting to record. "Look at that, boys," the leader sneered. "Maybe we take our payment another way." Kira stumbled back, clutching at her torn shirt, fury and humiliation burning in her eyes. The bikers laughed louder, their voices filling the bar with malice. But then everything stopped. A single word, low and cold, cut through the noise. Enough. The leader turned, his smirk fading as he saw John Cena standing there, calm and deadly. The air shifted and everyone knew something was about to change. The silence in the bar was suffocating. The laughter of the bikers had died the moment John Cena stood up, his presence shifting the atmosphere entirely. His eyes, cold and unwavering, locked onto the leader of the group, whose grip on Kira's torn shirt tightened for just a moment before hesitation flickered across his face. But hesitation was quickly buried under arrogance. The leader let out a low chuckle and released Kira with a dismissive shove, stepping back just slightly, as if sizing up the situation. His companions were still grinning, their hands resting loosely at their sides, but there was a new wariness in their posture. They had walked into this bar expecting an easy job, a frightened bartender, and a bunch of nobodies too scared to interfere. They hadn't expected John Cena. Kira took a step back, her breath still uneven as she clutched the torn remains of her shirt against her chest. She didn't speak, didn't move more than she had to, but her eyes burned with fury. John, however, was the picture of calm, his hands relaxed at his sides, his shoulders loose, but there was an undeniable tension beneath the surface, a readiness that spoke louder than any threat. The leader of the bikers straightened his jacket, forcing a smirk onto his face as he turned to fully face John. The bar was still, the regulars frozen in place, waiting to see how this would unfold. "And who exactly do you think you are?" The leader's voice was mocking, but there was a slight edge to it. John didn't blink. "You're going to apologize, and then you're going to leave." A slow chuckle rumbled from the leader's chest, growing into a full laugh as he turned to his crew. "You hear that, boys? He thinks he gives the orders." The others laughed too, though there was something forced in their amusement now, something uneasy. The leader turned back to John, rolling his shoulders as if preparing himself for a fight. "Look, big guy, I don't know who you think you are, but we own this block, this bar, this girl, this whole damn street. You're just another idiot who doesn't know when to stay out of things." John's expression didn't change. His voice remained calm. "Last chance. Apologize." The leader's smirk twisted into something uglier. "Or what? You gonna throw hands? You got no idea who you're messing with, man." John sighed, the sound almost disappointed. Then, in one swift movement, he stepped forward and grabbed the leader's wrist. The biker's smirk disappeared in an instant as John's grip tightened like a steel vise, squeezing down with controlled precision. There was a sickening pop, and the leader let out a sharp gasp, his knees buckling slightly. His free hand shot up instinctively, trying to pry John's fingers loose, but it was useless. "I don't repeat myself," John said, his voice even. "Apologize." The leader gritted his teeth, his face twisting in pain as he struggled to maintain his composure in front of his men. His breath came in short, uneven bursts, and his forced smirk had vanished completely. "You son of a—" John twisted his wrist just slightly, and the biker let out a strangled grunt. Fine, I'm sorry." His voice was strained, the humiliation thick in every syllable. John held him there for a second longer, letting the apology settle, then released him abruptly. The leader stumbled back, cradling his wrist, glaring daggers at John. The bar was silent. The regulars were still frozen, caught between shock and something close to awe. Kira, her breathing finally steadying, adjusted her grip on her torn shirt, her expression unreadable. John didn't look at her, didn't break his gaze from the bikers. "Leave," he said simply. The leader hesitated, fury and wounded pride warring in his expression. He glanced at his men, searching for support, but for the first time, they weren't laughing. They weren't grinning. They were waiting to see what he would do next. And in that hesitation, he lost. The leader spit onto the floor, his eyes still burning with anger. "This isn't over," he snarled. John didn't react. "I think it is." The leader took another step back, then gestured sharply to his men. "Let's go." The three bikers hesitated for just a second, then followed, their bravado shaken. They moved towards the door, their boots scuffing against the floor, their presence still heavy in the air even as they left. The door swung shut behind them, and for a long moment, no one in the bar moved. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken tension, then finally someone let out a low breath. Kira exhaled slowly, lowering her arms just slightly as she shook her head. That was... She started but trailed off. John turned to look at her now, his expression softer but still unreadable. "You okay?" She nodded, running a hand through her hair before realizing how much of her shirt was still exposed. She grabbed a towel from behind the bar and pulled it around her shoulders, ignoring the way her hands still trembled slightly. Yeah, I'm fine." John studied her for a moment longer, as if making sure, then nodded once. The rest of the bar finally seemed to wake up, murmurs spreading through the room as people began shifting, exchanging glances, shaking their heads. Kira let out a short, breathless laugh, still shaken but steady. "You know," she said, looking at John, "I think you just made some enemies." John shrugged, his voice dry. "Wouldn't be the first time." Kira exhaled again, then started to move, regaining her composure as she went to grab a clean shirt from the back. As she disappeared into the hallway, an older man from the back of the bar cleared his throat and muttered, "Never seen anything like that." His eyes flicked to John, filled with something close to admiration. You didn't even hesitate. John didn't respond. He didn't need to. The morning had changed. Outside, the low rumble of motorcycles echoed down the street as the bikers disappeared into the city. But John knew what kind of men they were. He knew they weren't done, not yet. The bar remained quiet long after the bikers left, their departure leaving a heavy weight in the air that even the returning murmur of the regulars couldn't shake. Kira emerged from the back wearing a fresh shirt, her face composed but pale. She gave John a grateful glance but didn't speak. There were no words that could undo what had happened, but the fact that John was still sitting there brought her a small sense of comfort. Slowly, the bar returned to some semblance of normalcy, though the incident remained on everyone's mind. John stayed longer than usual, his posture relaxed but his eyes constantly scanning the door. He knew the look in the leader's eyes when he left. That wasn't a man finished with his business. A few more customers trickled in, some hearing whispers of what happened and choosing to stay quiet. The morning crawled into the afternoon, and just as the sun began its slow descent, the door opened again. This time it wasn't a biker, but a man in his 30s, dressed in a worn-out suit. He looked around nervously before spotting Kira behind the bar. "You're the owner?" he asked quickly, his voice hushed but urgent. Kira nodded slowly, eyeing him warily. "Can I help you?" The man leaned in, lowering his voice. "I heard what happened." Words spreading fast. "Those bikers, they've been pulling this crap all over the neighborhood. I run the diner down the street. Last week they came in, did the same thing. Threatened my staff, broke a few chairs, scared the hell out of my waitress." John listened quietly, his jaw tightening slightly. The man continued, "They're not just bluffing either. Heard they torched a guy's food truck 2 blocks over when he couldn't pay. Cops couldn't do anything. No proof, No witnesses willing to talk. Kira's hands curled into fists on the counter. They came here thinking they'd get away with it again. The man gave a weak smile. Guess they didn't expect someone like him. He nodded toward John. But that's the thing. He leaned in even closer. After they left here, they came to my place again. Said what happened here was a mistake, and now the whole neighborhood's gonna pay for it. Kira's breath caught. They're planning something, she muttered. The man nodded grimly. I'm sure of it. Just thought you should know. Be careful. With that, he slipped away, leaving the same way he came. Kira stood frozen for a moment, absorbing the weight of the warning. John finished his drink and set the glass down with a quiet thud. They're not done, he said flatly. Kira sighed heavily. No, they're not. She looked around the bar. You ever deal with people like this before? More than you know, John answered simply. The rest of the day passed in a strained quiet. Kira kept glancing toward the door, her mind racing with possibilities. What if they came back? What if they didn't come back but sent someone else? The regulars noticed the change, too, their usual banter muted, their eyes occasionally flicking toward John as if drawing silent reassurance from his presence. As the evening crept in, Kira was wiping down the counter when Officer Taylor walked through the door. His face was unreadable, but the tension in his shoulders gave him away. He approached the bar and leaned against it, nodding at John. Cena, Taylor greeted. John nodded back. Taylor's gaze shifted to Kira. I've been hearing things, he began. Rumors. Kira frowned. What kind of rumors? Taylor glanced around before lowering his voice. Word is those bikers are planning something. Nothing concrete yet, but my guys say they've been stirring around, gathering people, asking questions. Whatever it is, it's not good. Kira felt her stomach tighten. They're that pissed about what happened? Taylor scoffed. Men like that? Yeah. Getting put in their place by a woman, humiliated in front of their crew, and then someone like Cena walking in and wrecking their pride? That's not something they forget. That's the kind of thing they retaliate over. Kira crossed her arms. So what do we do? Just sit here and wait? Taylor sighed. Pretty much. My guys are watching, but those bastards know how to stay just out of sight. They're smart enough to know when we're close. Kira exhaled sharply. Great. Taylor gave her a serious look. I mean it, Kira. You need to be careful. I don't think they're coming back just for a drink. She met his gaze, her eyes hard. I'm not scared of them. Taylor studied her for a second and then gave a slight smirk. Yeah, figured you'd say that. He glanced at John. You sticking around? John nodded once. Good, Taylor replied. I'd rather you be here than not. Just keep your head on a swivel. With that, he pushed off the bar and left, his footsteps heavy against the floor. Kira watched him go, then ran a hand through her hair. Well, that was comforting. John remained quiet, his eyes never leaving the door. Minutes ticked by slowly, each one dragging longer than the last. The regulars continued their quiet drinking, their conversations subdued and short. Night began to fall, the sunlight fading from the windows, replaced by the artificial glow of the bar's overhead lights. Kira moved through her tasks mechanically, her mind clearly elsewhere. Every time the door creaked, every time a car backfired outside, she flinched just slightly, her gaze shooting toward the entrance. John noticed, but said nothing. He was watching, too, his body still, but his mind running through every possible scenario. The bikers wouldn't let this go. Men like that didn't just slink away after being humiliated. They regrouped, gathered their strength, and came back twice as angry. Finally, Kira let out a shaky laugh. "How long you planning to sit there, John?" "Until I don't need to," he replied simply. She shook her head, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "And here I thought you just liked the drinks." John gave a quiet chuckle but didn't answer. The night stretched on, the silence of the city outside almost eerie in its stillness. Nothing happened. No roaring engines, no shouting, no threats. But that didn't mean it was over. It just meant the worst was yet to come. The night dragged on, heavy with the weight of expectation. The usual sounds of the city were present outside, but everything felt subdued, like the air itself was holding its breath. Inside the bar, Kira moved mechanically, pretending to focus on cleaning glasses and wiping down the counter, but her eyes kept darting to the door. The customers who had stayed this late were quiet, their conversations little more than murmurs as they sipped their drinks and cast uneasy glances toward John. He remained seated, his large frame relaxed, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the room and the windows beyond. He wasn't here for the drink anymore. He was here for what was coming. Hours passed, but the tension never left. Every creak of the door, every sound from outside made Kira's shoulders tighten. She kept busy, but even she couldn't fake calm anymore. Finally, just after midnight, the silence was shattered. The low rumble of motorcycle engines echoed down the street, growing louder with every second. Kira froze, her heart hammering in her chest. John's eyes flicked toward the door, his posture shifting instantly. It was time. The engines cut off just outside. Heavy boots hit the pavement, the slow, deliberate sound of men who wanted to be heard before they were seen. Then the door swung open. No dramatic kick this time. No sudden burst of noise. Just controlled, calculated menace. 7 men walked in. Not 4. 7. The leader was there, his wrists now wrapped in a brace, his face twisted with barely restrained fury. Behind him, 6 more bikers fanned out, their eyes cold, their expressions hard. They spread through the bar like a disease, positioning themselves near the exits, near the patrons, making sure no one could leave easily. The leader's eyes locked onto Kira. "You made a big mistake," he growled. Kira forced herself to stand tall, though every instinct screamed at her to back away. "You're back," she said simply. The leader sneered. "Did you really think this was over?" Kira swallowed hard. "I was hoping it was." He leaned on the bar, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the wood. "You embarrassed us," he spat. "Made us look weak." "And him?" He jerked his head toward John without looking. He got in the way of something that didn't concern him. John didn't move, his eyes fixed on the leader. The leader finally turned his gaze to John, his lips curling into a sneer. "You think you're some kind of hero? You're not. You're a dead man." His voice was steady, controlled, but the rage simmered just beneath the surface. Kira felt her knees tremble but forced herself to stay still. "So what now?" she asked. The leader smiled darkly. Now we settle this the right way." Before anyone could react, he grabbed a bottle from the bar and swung it at John's head. The bottle smashed against the counter as John dodged easily, shards of glass flying through the air. In one fluid motion, John's fist connected with the leader's stomach, knocking the wind out of him. The man stumbled back, coughing and gasping, his rage boiling over. "Get him!" he screamed. The bar erupted into chaos. The 6 remaining bikers lunged, the regulars ducking for cover behind tables and chairs. The first came at John with a chair, swinging it wildly. John caught it. midair and yanked it from the man's grasp before shoving him hard against the wall. Another came with a knife, slashing toward John's side. John twisted, grabbed the man's wrist and slammed his elbow down, forcing the knife to the floor with a loud clatter. The third tried to tackle him, but John sidestepped, catching the biker by the collar and driving him head first into the nearest table. Wood splintered, the biker groaning as he crumpled. Two more hesitated, seeing how quickly John had dismantled their friends, but pride pushed them forward. One swung a punch that John blocked with ease before delivering a brutal uppercut that sent the man flying backward. The last attempted to grab Kira, reaching over the bar with a snarl. Kira didn't think. She grabbed a heavy metal tray and swung it with everything she had, connecting with the biker's face. He howled in pain, staggering back, blood streaming from his nose. John finished him off with a single punch that sent him collapsing to the floor. The leader, recovering from the blow to his stomach, pulled a knife from his belt. "Enough!" he roared, his face red with rage. "You die tonight!" John's eyes narrowed, his body shifting into a fighting stance. The leader lunged, the knife aimed straight at John's chest. Kira screamed, but John was ready. He caught the leader's wrist, twisting hard until the knife fell. With a roar, John slammed the man onto the bar counter, the wood groaning under the weight. "Stay down," John growled. Sirens blared outside. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows. The front door burst open as Officer Taylor and two more cops stormed in, guns drawn. "Everybody down!" Taylor shouted. The two remaining bikers raised their hands immediately, fear etched on their faces. The leader squirmed under John's grip but couldn't move. Taylor took one look around the room, his face hardening. "What the hell did I tell you?" he muttered as he cuffed the leader. The officers moved quickly, restraining the rest of the bikers. As the leader was hauled to his feet, he snarled at John. "This isn't over." John didn't even blink. "Yeah, it is." Taylor glanced at Kira, his expression softening slightly. "You all right?" Kira nodded shakily. "Thanks to him," she said, nodding toward John. Taylor sighed. "You know, I should charge you for the damage," he muttered. John smirked. "They started it." Taylor shook his head. Yeah. He gave Kira a nod. "You need anything, you call." With that, the officers hauled the bikers out, their threats fading into nothing as the door slammed shut behind them. The bar was a mess. Broken tables, shattered glass, chairs overturned. But it was over. Kira leaned against the counter, her hands trembling. "I should be freaking out," she whispered. John sat back down at his usual spot, completely calm. "But you're not." Kira exhaled, a shaky laugh escaping her. "No, I'm not." She looked around at the destruction, then back at John. "You staying for another drink?" John smirked. "Like always." Kira grabbed a clean glass, her hands steadier now. The city outside was waking up again, the chaos fading into the background. And despite everything, Kira knew one thing. This was her bar, and no one was taking it from her. Not now. Not ever. The bar was quiet the morning after the fight, the kind of quiet that felt earned after a long night of chaos. The regulars returned one by one, each of them glancing around at the freshly cleaned tables and repaired furniture, their voices hushed as they whispered about what had happened. The smell of wood polish still lingered in the air as Kira moved through the bar with steady hands, setting glasses in their places and wiping down the counters like she always did. But there was a new weight on her shoulders now, the memory of what had happened still fresh in her mind. Every now and then, she would glance at the door, half expecting it to burst open again, but the morning remained calm. When the door finally did open, it was no surprise to see John Cena stepping inside as if it were any other day. He didn't speak as he crossed the room, simply nodded to a few familiar faces and took his usual seat at the bar. Kira couldn't help the small smirk that tugged at her lips as she poured him his usual drink and set it down in front of him. "You're back already," she teased. John shrugged. "Like always." Kira leaned against the bar and gave him a long look. "You know, you've been the talk of the town since yesterday. People are still trying to wrap their heads around it." John took a sip of his drink and glanced at her. "People like to talk." "Yeah, well, this time they're talking about you knocking out 7 bikers like it was nothing." Kira chuckled. "Can't say I'm not impressed." "They started it," John replied simply. Kira shook her head with a smile, but before she could say anything else, the door opened again. A man stepped inside, unfamiliar and tense. He wore a plain suit, slightly wrinkled, his face pale and drawn. He walked straight up to the bar and leaned in. "You're Kira, right? The owner?" Kira straightened. "That's right." The man glanced around, then lowered his voice. "I heard what happened here. Those bikers." Kira's jaw tightened. "Yeah, what about it?" The man swallowed hard. "They've been hitting places all over town. I run a diner a few blocks away. Last week they came in, same story. Demanded money, threatened my staff, smashed a few chairs when we refused." John listened quietly, his eyes narrowing. The man kept talking, his voice trembling slightly. "After they left here yesterday, they came back to my place. Said what happened here was just a start. Said they weren't done with this neighborhood. They broke a window. Told me to pass along a message." Kira frowned. "What message?" "They said they're coming back. They're not done. Said no one makes a fool of them." The man sighed and looked at Kira with pleading eyes. "I just thought you should know. Be careful." Kira exhaled slowly and nodded. "Thanks for telling me." The man nodded once, then quickly left as if staying any longer would put him in danger. Kira turned to John, her face grim. "So they're not done." John's jaw clenched. "They never are." Kira ran a hand through her hair. "Great, just what I needed." John leaned back in his chair. "You're handling it better than most." Kira let out a small laugh. "Yeah, well, I'd rather not have to handle it at all." The rest of the morning passed slowly. Customers came and went, most of them stealing glances at John and Kira, their faces full of quiet respect. No one asked questions. No one needed to. They all knew what had happened, and most of them seemed relieved that someone like John was still around. Kira moved through the bar, serving drinks and cleaning tables, but her mind kept drifting back to the man's warning. Every sound from outside made her flinch. Every shadow made her tense. John stayed longer than usual, sitting at the bar and sipping his drink, his eyes always on the door. He didn't have to say anything. Kira knew he was waiting, just like she was. Waiting for whatever was coming next. Hours passed, the sun dipping lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the floor. As the afternoon faded into evening, the door opened again. This time, it was Officer Taylor. He looked tired, like a man who had been carrying bad news all day. Taylor walked up to the bar and sighed, heard the rumors. "Those bikers aren't done. My guys say they've been gathering more people, planning something." Kira's face darkened. "They're really that mad?" Taylor nodded. "Men like that?" "Yeah, they got embarrassed. In front of their crew, in front of the whole damn neighborhood. They're not going to let it slide." Kira crossed her arms. "So what? We wait around until they show up again?" Taylor sighed. "Pretty much. My guys are watching, but they're smart enough to know when we're close." Kira shook her head. "This is ridiculous." Taylor glanced at John. "You sticking around?" John nodded. Good. I'd rather have you here. Taylor leaned in, but you both need to be careful. These guys, they're dangerous. Kira met his gaze. I'm not scared of them. Taylor smirked slightly. Figured you'd say that. He gave them both a nod and left, his shoulders heavy as he walked out the door. Kira watched him go, then looked at John. Well, that was encouraging. John didn't respond. His eyes stayed on the door, his face unreadable. The minutes ticked by slowly, every second heavier than the last. The bar filled with its usual evening crowd, but the atmosphere was different. Everyone felt it. The tension, the anticipation. The regulars tried to act normal, but their eyes kept drifting toward the door, toward John, toward Kira. As the night wore on, Kira found herself glancing at the clock more and more. How long are you planning to sit there? She asked finally. Until I don't need to, John replied without looking at her. Kira sighed and shook her head. And here I thought you just liked the drinks. John gave a small chuckle, but it didn't reach his eyes. The night stretched on, and still nothing happened. No roaring engines, no sudden bursts of violence. But that didn't mean the danger was gone. It just meant it was coming. Kira could feel it in her bones, and judging by the way John stayed seated, silent and watchful, so could he. Some fights leave scars, but they also prove who's truly strong. What would you do in a moment like this? Tell us in the comments. And if you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one.